like when I talk to cricket teams about working for them, they're like, "Oh, you want to do Moneyball analytics?" I'm like, "No, I want to do due diligence. You don't even know why your good players are good."
The next thing, I want to speak about is the movie that you made, Death of a Gentleman, 6 years ago. A lot of people also want to know about it. I understand, what was the motive behind it. You probably wanted to highlight how the game was being run. 6 years down the line, do you think it's become better, or it's become worse? What do you think?
It's not worse. It's probably bad in a different way. I don't think you have 2/3 cricket bodies trying to destroy the game for their own personal benefit right at the moment. You could argue that the smaller nations, since that moment, had a chance to really fix cricket, and they've pulled it back into the shit again. Things like, oh, we don't want 17, we don't want a proper promotion and relegation of Test cricket because we might go to the second tier. You should go to the second tier. If you're not good enough, you shouldn't be in the first tier. That's how sport works. And there's also been, this huge thing to monetize the ICC so that the other teams get more money. And that has caused huge problems, like the associate cricket system has been completely gutted. The promotion of the smaller nations has been completely gutted. Decisions are now made solely on how much money we can make in each TV cycle, rather than the best way to grow the game. But, we're closer to having cricket in the Olympics. It's very hard to argue that small cricket boards around the world aren't getting their act together when the Brazilian women's team is professional, when the Thai women's team qualify for a World Cup, and the Japanese under-19 team make the World Cup. It's getting harder to be more insular now. When we started that film, there was no one covering global cricket politics. You could kind of do whatever you wanted, and we kind of invented a genre, and there are whole people now that follow those sorts of things. And I used to tweet about cricket politics and get like a like. If I put I made a tweet up about it now, you'd get thousands. So I think that things have fundamentally changed in that way, but there are huge problems within the game. Essentially, the biggest problem is that no one currently runs cricket, and that is a very dangerous space for cricket to be in. It allows a potential billionaire from outside the sport to come in and buy up all the best players. It allows India, England, Australia to get back together again and do whatever they want. It allows India to do whatever they want, maybe even on their own. But the biggest problem is it allows all these different leagues and things to just bang into each other and slap each other in the face. And there's I cannot make this any clearer. No one is in charge of world cricket at the moment. And that is just a shambolic place for one of the world's biggest sports to be in.
Well, strong words there. I personally feel that, even though you spoke of how the Japanese team has qualified for the under-19 World Cup, there's a professional Brazilian women's cricket team. I just felt that, having 10 teams at the 2019 World Cup was a huge step backwards. I've always felt that, the format that was there in the 2007 Cricket World Cup was the best format. I know that India and Pakistan got knocked out, but if you were to compare it to, say, a football World Cup format or some other format, the beauty of the World Cups have always been about upsets and a big team getting knocked out. I just think that that was the best format, which allowed a lot of inclusivity, and it gave the associate nations also a chance to play a lot more games, because after that, what we saw in 2011 and 2015, they would just keep on playing, and you had probably more, you could say, redundant games, because had they lost 3 4 games, then they were just playing for the sake of it. So that's what I think about it. But
what I would add is that Kenya was the last big team we lost, right? Kenya was obviously a World Cup semi-finalist. I think it would be increasingly hard for cricket to ever lose a team like Kenya now, because we can stream all the games. There are alternative routes towards funding. There are the associate teams are a lot smarter and a lot better run. There is now a they can play each other, and all those sorts of little things that allow them, which wasn't really happening much in the 90s or 2000s like it is now. We've got all these leagues, which means that it's actually quite hard for ICC to just say we're only going to have 10 teams in the next World Cup. There's a certain point where that's just not going to work for them, and they're not going to be able to. I mean, they've barely been able to sell it for that last World Cup. They're not going to be able to sell it going into the future. So the fact that everyone else is improving around them, for me, means that's the most important thing, that teams continue to get better, teams continue to grow, and that is happening. Cricket has never been stronger around the world than it is right now. And I don't even mean that, it's not even up for debate. Cricket in the 90s, associate cricket in the 90s, there's hardly any. So Bangladesh in the 90s or Scotland of the 90s would get lapped by Papua New Guinea. They would get lapped by Nepal, right? And women's cricket, forget about it. There was no women's cricket teams outside the top 4 or 5, right? Cricket is so much stronger than it's ever been. That's not going away because a kid in Nepal who sees Sandeep bowl can go on YouTube and learn how to do it. That's because Scotland play Papua New Guinea, and kids in Papua New Guinea and kids in Scotland can get on their phone and can watch the game. It's not like before. These games happened in a vacuum before, right? You could get good and it didn't matter because you didn't make the World Cup and you disappeared. That is not the case anymore. Ali Khan can end up playing in the IPL. And I think that is, there's a certain point where, because no one is running the ICC, there's going to be too many good teams to ignore that sort of stuff. And also, if they keep moving the ICC towards monetizing things, you're not going to be able to keep out Brazil, USA, and Japan because they have money. Those are places with actual money. Do you know what I mean? You can shit can Nepal and Papua New Guinea and Kenya because you can be like, how much are they going to give us to the rights? If Japan fall in love with cricket, we are talking $1 billion industry in Japan alone. Brazil, we don't even need that many people to make a big difference because there's so many of them. USA, when they get obsessed, look, I've been saying for years, I could see when I started writing about cricket in 2007, Americans had just started to get into football, right? You could see it coming, just starting to mention it more and more. And I said, we have somewhere between the next 5 and 15 years, the same thing will happen with cricket. Cricket is a sport that will obsess the sports nerds in America because it is so endlessly fascinating. Just learning the laws is going to blow some of their minds, and the sorts of countries that we have that are good at it, the conditions, when they find out how much the pitch can play, all those sorts of things. My guess is it will be the next hipster sport of America, right? All these things are available to us now. There's a certain point where, because no one's in charge at the ICC, they're not going to be able to fight against that. But once one of those 3 countries that I've just mentioned breaks through, I just can't imagine England and India and Australia forming any cogent argument that, I don't know if we should allow the USA to be in the World Cup. Do you know what I mean? I'd be shocked if that is the case. Or we can't let Japan in, seeing what Japan has done with baseball, for God's sake. So my guess is that at a certain point, what has happened now is there has been a globalization of cricket through things like Willow TV, things like these online streaming platforms, things like Cricinfo and ESPN, and all these sorts of different things. YouTube will be a big part of it as well. And you will start to get football hipsters from around the world cottoning onto cricket. And cricket, we both know how absolutely captivating cricket is for nerds, right? And that's how nerds spread things. For all the cool guys in the world can try and nerd spread things, right? And essentially, that is how I see it going. And if that's the case, the ICC can be as insular as they want, and it won't matter. It'll just grow too much. So yeah, we're in a tough spot. And the last World Cup was a disgrace to cricket. Only having 10 teams when, for the first time ever, we had way more than 10 teams who are actually good. But when it comes down to it, I think we're in a best place that we can be in going forward, considering how badly cricket is currently run.
I definitely see your point. And what you mentioned about the 90s, I remember in the 90s, just winning for an associate team was such a big thing. I've not watched it. I started watching in 2003, but I remember that In the 99 World Cup, when Bangladesh beat Pakistan, they had announced a public holiday the next day. That's how things were at that point of time. So we did definitely.
Sri Lanka won a game, got test status. Zimbabwe won about 2 games and got test status. Bangladesh won a game and got test status. That's how excited we were when associate teams won back then. Now, how many games did Ireland have to get? That's how much better associate cricket is now than it was back then.
Definitely. I mean, this conversation is quite convincing for me as well, because I definitely want the sport of cricket to grow. And you know what you've told me gives me a lot of hope about the future, because I keep worrying that okay, this sport is such fascinating sport. It has so many. See, I personally don't know a sport that is affected by weather conditions as much as what cricket is. So I keep worrying about the future, but this has just assured me, and I'm sure it has assured a lot of other people who will hear this conversation, that this sport is going nowhere. It's probably in the best possible shape than it ever was in terms of its future. Uh, Jared, the next thing that I now want to ask you about is that tell us about any one player that you've been looking at, which you think is going to take the world by storm. I hope it's someone who we haven't heard of or is unknown. Uh, Just one player that sort of fascinates you so much that you think, okay, this is the one player who will definitely do well. It could be from anywhere, be it women's cricket, the under 19 level, from the associate countries, etc. Just one name.
I mean, I haven't been. If you'd asked me about a year ago or a year and a half ago, it would have been Kyle Jamieson. I was massively high on him and couldn't understand why he wasn't already playing league cricket all around the world and dominating. Um, I'm still a strong believer in Billy Stanlake, because we've never had a combination player of that height with that pace before. And I want to believe that will eventually come good. I'm trying to think if there's anyone else that is particularly out there. I mean, Pat Brown, we talked about before, I think is a fascinating cricketer. Again, has the ability to deviate the ball at pace, of which there aren't many people, but I'm just not sure his body's going to be. He's done his back a couple of times and he's only young. Trying to think if there's anyone else coming through. I'm a big fan of Glenn Phillips. I suppose he's sort of already started to come through a little bit, hasn't he? I still believe in Benny Howell, but sadly, it doesn't look like any major leagues are ever going to give him a chance. But there will be another Benny Howell after him, I'm sure, who will probably make millions, and Benny Howell will sit yelling at his TV. Should have been me. I suppose, yeah, if you'd asked me about a year and a half ago, or maybe even 2 years ago, it would have been Jamieson and Puran. So I was pretty spot on with those guys. Stan Lake hasn't quite come on the way that I thought. I'm trying to think if there's any other. I think that I'd be really interested to see what happens when Papua New Guinea get to the World Cup and people see them field. I'd be very interested to see what the reaction is when you see a team of 9 or 10 guys who are elite level fielders all at the same time. I watched them do a fielding practice, and I've never seen so many guys hit a stump. It was almost pointless doing the fielding practice at a certain point because they had to stop so often to put the stumps back up. Single stump, I should add. Their athleticism and the way that they go about fielding, the way that they genuinely want to field. I don't know if there's ever been a fielding team in world cricket before, but Papua New Guinea could do that. So really excited about them. If you're looking at Charles Amini, their leg spinner all-rounder, I think should already be playing league cricket around the world. Another player I really liked who I thought deserved more opportunities, but I suppose, again, we're talking about a couple of years ago now, is maybe Hayden Walsh, who I thought was close to the best fielder in the world, and is a really, really interesting talent. So I suppose those sorts of guys, I don't know how many of those are well known to everyone, but those are certainly the sorts of players that I've seen in the traps. And I suppose the big one, and quite literally in his case, is Rahkeem Cornwall, who I still don't think we've seen. I don't think we've seen even 50% of what he can do. He is one of the most naturally talented cricketers I've ever seen. And I'm just hoping that one day he has the ability to show that on the biggest stage consistently, because you don't get players of his skill set very often.
For me also, Rahkeem Cornwall is a very fascinating player, in the sense that in today's world of sport, we talk of fitness so important, so often, that it's one of the most important things. It's something that makes you a better batsman, better bowler, better fielder, etc., etc. But when you look at him and look at him doing so well, you probably realize that maybe there are different aspects to cricket fitness as well. Maybe you can still survive in the game despite not being as lean as what other conventional cricketers are. So for me, in that sense, he'll always be a pretty fascinating study and an enigma. And I hope, like you said, someday there is that more study on a player of his caliber.
Well, if you look at someone like him, it's important to remember, and we don't factor in how much T20 specifically has become a power game. And he is literally a power player. I saw him mishit a spinner over cover for 6 in the nets one day in Trinidad. He's a completely different kind of level of player in that sort of thing. But also, we haven't had a spinner of his size and strength before, which makes him a very different spinner to Murali Kartik or, Harbhajan Singh or, someone like that, in that he's so strong and has the ability to get pace and bounce and energy on the ball in a way that a normal spinner just will never be able to. We haven't really factored in that level of athleticism at all. And, it's one of the things that I'm really fascinated is the way that different players grow up in different environments. So Paul Harris and Ashley Giles and Michael Beer and Ray Price, these are very strong, muscular spinners. You don't get strong, muscular spinners in Asia. You get strong guys, but they don't bowl in that sort of masculine, sort of thick way of, hitting the pitch hard and not giving you anything.
Probably don't put their body too much into as opposed to other spinners that we see. And my sorry to cut you off here, but my first realization of this was the 2012 India England series at home. The way Monty Panesar just out-bowled the 3 Indian spinners, and he did it just with bowling 5 to 10 kilometers quicker than what Pragyan Oja or Ravichandran Ashwin or Harbhajan Singh or even Ravindra Jadeja in the last test match were doing. It wasn't as if that he was turning the ball more. It was just that he was, bowling it a lot more quicker than what Indian spinners could do. They were just not strong enough, I thought. And that is where,
but that's essentially what I'm talking about. He's almost the perfect example here because he is an Asian person by birth, right? By ethnicity. He's born in England, I think, but by ethnicity, he's an Asian person, right? But because of the environment that he's come up in, he actually bowls a lot more like a Western spinner. And what you're talking about, that extra pace and that, I've never, ever heard anyone talk about Asian spinners and say, oh, you can't play a pull shot off him. And it's just not a phrase you hear for Asian spinners, right? In Australia, in England and South Africa, people talk about that all the time. Oh, you can never play a pull shot off him. And it's like, there's a completely different way that we are thinking that Ashley Giles is he's a left arm finger spinner, but he is nothing like Murali Kartik. They are 2 different species of bowlers, right? And someone like Monty should have been, and maybe didn't quite get there in the end, but could have been like a hybrid between the 2 in that, clearly he had some abilities, there has to be a reason why there are so many good spinners coming through places like England and Australia and South Africa that have Asian ethnicity, like, their parents were Asian or they were born in Asia. There has to be something to that. But there are strengths that Western spinners have, and they have to learn because they don't bowl on the good pitches. They don't get the good environments as much. So they have to learn that sort of combination. If you can combine those 2 things, and we see this with batters all the time. You might get an Indian batter who comes from their local area where the pitches are just quicker, right? And so they are really good at handling the ball come through, but they still have to be really good in all the other parts of India, because otherwise you won't get through the Ranji. If you can't average 50 in first class cricket playing on a bunch of turning decks there, you're not going to be able to get to the Indian team. So you have to be good. Those sorts of little things, we haven't even got to the. We're very good at saying that an Asian, so many Western teams have like an Asian spin bowling coach, right? Who comes over. And so many Asian teams have like a Western fast bowling coach. But we don't do the opposite. And we don't think about, if you're like Chaminda Vaas was an absolute genius of a bowler, right? Think about what he had to do to be successful on Sri Lankan pitches, right? And then also be successful away from Sri Lanka. He had to learn a lot more about bowling around the world than Jimmy Anderson did, because Jimmy Anderson knew that once he went home, he's going to be able to take a lot of wickets. That doesn't mean that Jimmy Anderson isn't great, but it means that what has Chaminda Vaas learnt, or Kapil Dev or Javagal Srinath had to learn, that would be really helpful to Pat Cummins or to Anrik Nortje or to Jimmy Anderson. And we haven't even touched that. And those sorts of things, I just think are just, we are so, it is very easy to find a bowling coach who played in a environment where he was a very good bowler because he grew up where it was in his favor. What about the opposite? How do we find the opposite? Like Damian Martin was a guy who grew up in the WACA who then became a great player of spin in Asia. I'm far more interested in how he did that than I am in Kumar Sangakkara, who grew up on spinning pitches and was good on spinning pitches. Or sorry, not Kumar probably, but Mahela, who basically was the world's best player on spinning pitches, right? That's not saying that we can't learn something from Mahela, but like, how did Damian Martin turn himself from a bloke who was used to the ball being up here to the ball spinning around everywhere? And I think that there's so much to learn from these sorts of things in cricket that we haven't quite got to yet. And I think that I completely forget what the question was. I probably ruined this interview.
No, but I think the crux of what you're saying is that we are so driven by perceptions. Like someone from Asia is going to be good at playing spin bowling, is going to be a good spin bowler, that we never see the other side of it. That how did he become, like what you're saying with, would another example of that would be someone like say Sachin Tendulkar, short-heighted, played a lot of cricket in India. How did he become that good that he was able to score 100? But in Perth. But I think when it comes to Sachin, you have to give it to him that he's been one of the gifted talents. We could use probably some other example which you quoted, but you make a very interesting point that it's the perceptions that drive us so much that we never look at the other side of it. Like how someone like a Zahir Khan could be such a good bowling coach because he really never grew up in conditions which were conducive to fast bowling, but he still was, when he went to England, when he went to Australia, he was still able to do well. Or for that matter, someone like even Jasprit Bumrah, who was so quick in correcting his lengths. I remember in the first innings that he played in Cape Town, he didn't really get his length right, but by the time he was playing the third test in Johannesburg, he just knew what to do. So yeah, I mean that's an excellent point in terms of, even I have forgotten the question now, but fascinating, fascinating conversation. So now I'll move on to something recent, and we'll probably close with it. The World Test Championship is coming up, and India are going to play England also post that in the 5 Test match series. Who do you think is the favorite, and what are the few battles or players that you're going to look forward to? Do you think someone like a Chiteshwar Pujara? I know I'm asking particularly about Chiteshwar Pujara because when he was being criticized in Sydney a lot for playing too slow, you wrote a brilliant article which said that he was playing too slow because the kind of bowling that he was playing wasn't allowing him to attack anyone, and why his innings was so important. So what do you make of the World Test Championship coming up and the 5 Test match series that India are going to play in England?
Yeah, you get a lot of things wrong as a sports writer because obviously you can't tell the future. But geez, I should get a medal for the amount of times that I took on idiots online about Pujara. For that, I think I started doing it in Melbourne. You took Sydney. I think I was on that stuff in Melbourne. And the other player that I protected in Melbourne was Rishabh Pant. Weirdly enough, they both seemed to go really well later on in the series. But When you're asking who's the favorite, are you talking about the one-off test or the series?
Both. Both.
The one-off test, I just don't think we know, because it's unlike anything else we've ever had to factor in. And when you look at normal test matches, you have to factor in home conditions, and we don't have home conditions. I mean, and people will say, well, these conditions, New Zealand are more used to them. New Zealand don't have pitches like what we would expect. I'm expecting a 4-day test with a pitch with a bit of life in it, because that's basically what England have been making for quite a while, unless the ICC change, because they're going to want a result as well. And New Zealand have been playing on the flattest wickets of all time. They've been playing on flatter wickets than India ever did back in their flat wickets day. So I think it's going to be very fascinating. I think that if you break down the two teams, they both have the weapons, I think, to be able to win. I would assume that India is the better team, and that New Zealand has made the final largely because they played more at home. But I would never. I think that New Zealand team is just such a solid team that India have to sort of hit the ground running, and in New Zealand have this huge advantage in that they've got 2 warm-up tests in England beforehand. So I really don't know who to call in that particular one. I wouldn't be, if I was betting, I probably wouldn't be using my money at all. As a default, I would assume that England should win the series against India. I think it would be an incredible effort for India to beat England in that particular series. England are wildly unpredictable as a team, but when you've got Anderson, Broad, Wokes in your bowling lineup, even if Jofra doesn't play any of the tests, it's your batters are always under pressure, I think, going up against that England lineup. There's obviously a lot of weaknesses in the England batting order, so that is going to be a problem. Also think that my guess is that India won't play Jadeja at 6-7 and play their 5 bowlers, and I think that's a mistake. I think that that's what they should be looking at doing. I think that then they've got 2 world-class spinners and 3 incredible seamers, and that they can always keep England under pressure. But my guess is that they won't play one of Jadeja and Ashwin, which I just think is wrong, especially with Jadeja's form. I think I would definitely start with the 5-man bowling attack. But I generally, I think those teams are fairly well matched. If England and India were playing in a neutral venue, I probably have India slightly ahead. But being that it's at home, I probably have England slightly ahead. But there's no reason India couldn't win that series.
I tend to agree with you on the assessment of the one test match between India and New Zealand, but I think I'll slightly disagree with you that I think India are definitely going to start with both Ashwin and Jadeja. I think it's what they saw in the previous series, when they were touring Australia, was that they need to have 5 bowlers anyway, because every one bowler was breaking down every test match. And I think Virat's also the kind of captain who's very high on having at least 5 bowling options, if not more, and he tries to.
You're right, but there's a huge difference between England and Australia in that in Australia, your top 6 makes all the runs. Okay. And in England, your top 6 doesn't make as many runs. So it's easy to use 5 bowlers in Australia because it makes sense. It is not as easy to do it in England, where you could be 3 for 12 because of a couple of clouds coming in. So my guess is they won't do it, but if they do it, then I think it's a really, really good lineup. You have to back. I think you have to back your top order to handle the England bowlers, and then you back the fact that you have an incredible variety of bowlers, to be able to bowl them out consistently. But it should be a really good series.
Who would be your first 3 pacers for India? Who would start? Because there's after Siraj has come through the ranks, there's a lot of talk as to if Siraj would be the number 3 pacer or would it be Mohammad Shami. Who's going to be, like, everyone's talking about the other 2 pacers. Bumrah is a given, but there's a lot of talk about if Siraj is going to be the 3rd pacer or Shami or Ishant might miss out. Who would be your first 3 pacers for India?
Look, depending on form and fitness and all those sorts of things, it would be Bumrah, Shami, and Sharma. I don't really see any reason to go away from that. I mean, I think Ishant has proved that he's a world-class bowler many times over now, and I still think that I still think Mohammad Shami might be the best of the three right at the moment. It just he hasn't bowled as much of recent times, and we've forgotten. There's nothing wrong with Siraj, but you can also platoon them. Different players for different pitches. If you have, with the pitches that have a bit more bounce, you might want Siraj to come in for Shami, for instance, or make another move. So I don't think any team going into a 5-test series anymore can afford to pick just 3 seam bowlers. I don't think that is a realistic aim anymore because teams are just too clever now at tiring them out.
That's true. I mean, thankfully, Indian pace bowling reserves are better than what we have ever had, because there's obviously Siraj, there's obviously Umesh. They're also carrying Avesh and Prasidh Krishna in the reserves. And I think there's also Shardul Thakur. I am surprised. I was slightly disappointed that they left out Navdeep Saini, but you really can't have everyone. Well, I think we are done with the chat for today. It was very fascinating, very insightful. I'm sure my expression at quite a few points during the conversation just showed how taken aback and surprised I was in the things that came out of this chat. I hope that you also enjoyed, Jarrod, and you will probably come again sometime whenever we do another edition of it. And any closing thoughts for you, Jarrod?
No, not at all. Thanks for having me on, and good luck with it all. Oh, actually, no, I do have closing thoughts. Everyone who watches this obviously has to subscribe to my YouTube channel.
On that note, I'd say that you should subscribe to my YouTube channel as well.
No, just mine. You can only pick one.
Well, then you should go for Jarrod's. I mean, you're bound to learn a lot more about the game than what you learn from here, because Jarrod's only going to come on a few occasions on this channel, but on his channel he's pretty much regular. So yeah, can't argue there. So I have to give it to Jarrod. And hopefully, for the sake of all cricket fans who were there, I hope that we get to see some of more Jarrod's work, something new. The video series obviously amazing, but like the kind of person he is, who says that he gets bored too often. Hopefully, just out of boredom, he starts something else which leaves us fascinated once again. On that note, I'd say that that's it for this episode of Gupshup with Gill. Hope you all enjoyed it, and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Also, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe Jarrod's YouTube channel. Thank you to all of you. Hopefully, you had fun, and stay tuned for new episodes.